When you've lost everything that matters, sometimes rock bottom becomes your foundation. That's what Daniel Cole learned when he stood before a house nobody wanted, holding his wife's medical bills in one hand and his daughter's future in the other. Rain drummed against the roof of his weathered pickup truck, the steady rhythm a counterpoint to the thunder of his heartbeat. The windshield wipers squeaked across the glass, revealing glimpses of the Victorian mansion looming against the storm clouds like a wounded giant. Windows boarded up, paint peeling in long strips like bark from dying trees, the wraparound porch sagging beneath decades of neglect. A realtor's sold sign leaned at an angle in the overgrown yard, the price visibly crossed out and reduced multiple times. $12,000 for a three-story Victorian on 2 acres of land. In today's market, it should have been impossible. But Millbrook, Pennsylvania wasn't today's market. It was yesterday's, left behind when the steel mills closed and the young people moved away, leaving only the stubborn and the trapped. Until 3 months ago, Daniel had been neither. At 43, he'd taught American history at Millbrook High for 15 years. A steady job that had always been enough. Enough for their modest suburban home. Enough for family vacations to historical sites that doubled as research trips. Enough to feel secure in a world that seemed increasingly uncertain. But enough had never included watching your wife fade away while fighting a system that treated healing as a luxury commodity. The medical bills had started small, co-pays and deductibles that made Daniel wince but didn't break their monthly budget. Then came the experimental treatments, the out-of-network specialists, the medications insurance deemed not medically necessary, despite being Sarah's last hope. Daniel's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white against the worn leather. Sarah's wedding ring hung from the rearview mirror, catching what little light filtered through the clouds. He'd stopped wearing his own months ago, couldn't bear the weight after the funeral, but kept hers close. Sometimes he'd roll it between his fingers during long drives to job interviews that never materialized, or late at night when sleep wouldn't come and the house felt too empty to breathe in. In the back seat, 16-year-old Mira sat with headphones clamped over her ears, deliberately avoiding looking at their new home. At 5'6", she'd inherited Sarah's height and stubborn streak. But her deep brown eyes came from Daniel's side of the family, along with a tendency toward quiet brooding that worried him more than he'd admit. "Time to face the music," Daniel muttered to himself. They climbed out of the truck, rain immediately soaking through their jackets. Mira stood beside their packed Honda Civic, studying the Victorian mansion with the critical eye of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast. "Dad, this place looks like the Addams family house had a baby with a haunted prison." Despite everything, Daniel felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Sarcasm was Mira's armor against disappointment, and he'd take it over the hollow silence that had filled the months after Sarah's funeral. "It has good bones," Daniel said, mostly trying to convince himself. "We can make it work." Mira gave him a look that suggested she thought his bones might be the only good ones left between them. "Dad, the realtor gave us the keys and ran away. Literally ran. I saw her taillights disappearing around the corner like she was fleeing a crime scene." She wasn't wrong. Linda Morrison had been eager to close the deal. Too eager, in retrospect. The house had been on the market for 8 years, the price dropping every few months until it reached the magical number that matched Daniel's savings account almost exactly. The front door key stuck in the lock, requiring the kind of coaxing that suggested the house wasn't entirely ready to welcome new occupants. When it finally opened, the smell hit them first. Not the musty odor Daniel had expected, but something else. Something that reminded him of old libraries and his grandmother's attic, where she'd kept her husband's books and papers after he died. The smell of time itself, layered and complex with undertones of wood smoke and something floral that might have been perfume decades old. The interior revealed the house's split personality, grand gestures undermined by decades of neglect. A curved staircase dominated the foyer, its mahogany banisters still gleaming despite the dust. Above them, a chandelier hung like a crystal constellation, missing perhaps a third of its teardrops, but still magnificent in its ambitions. The hardwood floors showed water damage near the windows, but most of the boards remained solid beneath their feet. "It's actually kind of beautiful," Mira admitted, her voice softening as she took in the details. In a tragic Gothic romance sort of way. Daniel smiled, the first real smile he'd managed in months. Mira had always been drawn to stories, especially the complicated ones where beauty and sorrow lived side by side. It came from Sarah, that appreciation for life's contradictions. Sarah had been the one to introduce their daughter to Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters, to teach her that the most interesting characters were often the most wounded. They spent the afternoon exploring, opening doors to rooms that felt like museum exhibits from another century. A formal dining room with built-in china cabinets. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, most of the books long since removed, but the scent of old paper still lingering in the air. A kitchen that would need complete renovation, but had windows facing east toward a garden that might, with work, bloom again. The second floor held 5 bedrooms, each with its own personality. The master bedroom featured a fireplace and windows on 3 sides, flooding the space with afternoon light despite the grime on the glass. Mira claimed a corner room with a window seat that looked out over the town, while Daniel chose a smaller room that felt less overwhelming, less full of dreams he wasn't ready to dream again. It was on the 3rd floor that they found the most intriguing space. A circular room in the tower, completely empty except for dust motes dancing in shafts of sunlight. The windows had been painted over from the inside, but when Daniel scraped away a section with his thumbnail, the view was spectacular. Rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, broken by farmland and the occasional cluster of trees that marked old homesteads. "This could be your office," Mira suggested, "when you start writing that book you're always talking about." Daniel had mentioned the book exactly twice, both times when Sarah was in the hospital and he needed something to focus on besides the machines that measured her life in electronic beeps. The idea of writing about ordinary families who'd shaped American history, not the famous names in textbooks, but the farmers and factory workers and small-town teachers who'd built the country one life at a time. It had seemed possible then, when hope still had weight. Now it felt like another dream that belonged to the man he'd been before everything changed. But standing in that tower room, watching the light paint patterns on walls that had stood for a century and a half, Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope exactly, but something smaller and more manageable. Possibility. The idea that tomorrow might be different from today, even if he couldn't yet imagine how. That night, they ate takeout Chinese food on the floor of the empty living room, their voices echoing in the large space. Mayra talked about the new school she'd be attending, wondering if small-town kids would accept a refugee from the suburbs. Daniel listened, grateful that she was talking at all. The months after Sarah's funeral had been marked by silences that felt like accusations, by conversations that died before they could take root. "Dad," Mira said as they were cleaning up the containers, "I know this isn't what you planned. Moving here, leaving everything behind. I know you're doing it for me." Daniel started to protest, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I want you to know that I get it. We couldn't afford to stay, and we couldn't afford to start over anywhere that felt like home. So we came here to a place that feels like nowhere, hoping it might become somewhere." She paused, looking around the room with its peeling wallpaper and stained ceiling. "But maybe nowhere is exactly what we need right now. Maybe we need to be in a place that doesn't remind us of everything we lost." That night, Daniel lay on an air mattress in the master bedroom, listening to the house settle around them. Old houses made noise, expanding and contracting with temperature changes, floors creaking as wood moved in response to humidity, pipes gurgling as water found new paths through aging joints. But this house seemed to whisper rather than groan, as if it were sharing secrets with the darkness. He thought about Sarah as he did every night, but for the first time in months, the thoughts didn't feel like drowning. Instead, he found himself wondering about the people who'd lived here before them. Who had built this place and why? What dreams had they brought to these rooms, and what had driven them away? Outside, wind moved through the trees that surrounded the property, a sound like distant conversation. And somewhere in the walls around him, the house continued its patient whispering, as if it were trying to tell him something important, as if it were trying to say, "You're exactly where you need to be." 2 weeks into their residency at what Mira dubbed Castle Gloom, they'd established a routine that felt almost normal. Daniel rose before dawn to tackle the endless list of repairs the house demanded, while Mira explored the property with the methodical curiosity of someone who'd inherited her father's love of discovery. They'd made the kitchen functional, cleared the main living spaces of debris, and even managed to coax hot water from the ancient boiler in the basement. It was Mira who found it, of course. She'd been investigating what appeared to be a built-in bookshelf in the library, running her hands along the carved moldings with the kind of attention that comes from growing up in a house full of antiques. Her mother had taught her to appreciate craftsmanship, to notice the small details that revealed a maker's care and skill. "Dad," she called, her voice carrying an odd note of excitement. "Come look at this." Daniel found her kneeling beside the largest bookshelf, her fingers tracing what looked like a deliberate pattern in the wood grain. Up close, he could see that several of the carved roses along the shelf's frame were actually moving parts, roses that could be rotated, their petals realigned into different configurations. "It's a puzzle," Mira said, her eyes bright with the kind of engagement he hadn't seen since before Sarah got sick. "Look, if you turn this rose to match the others and then press here." The bookshelf shuddered, then swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow staircase that disappeared into darkness above them. Daniel's historian instincts kicked in immediately, even as his parental protective instincts set off alarm bells. Hidden passages in Victorian houses weren't uncommon. Wealthy families often included servant stairs and concealed storage areas in their designs. But this felt different, more deliberate, more secret. "We need flashlights," he said, already moving toward the kitchen where they'd stored their emergency supplies. "And we're not going up there alone." But Mira was already pulling out her phone, activating its flashlight feature. "Dad, this is the coolest thing that's happened to us in years. We can't just ignore it." She was right, and they both knew it. Daniel returned with 2 proper flashlights and a hammer, just in case they encountered anything that needed percussive maintenance. Together, they climbed the narrow staircase, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The stairs led to a landing that shouldn't have existed according to the house's visible architecture. A single door faced them, its brass nameplate green with age but still readable. "C. Voss, private study." "Cecilia Voss," Daniel murmured, his mind already working through the implications. The original owner. The door was locked, but the wood around the mechanism had warped with age. A few careful applications of leverage, and the door swung open to reveal a room that time had forgotten. Sunlight filtered through tall windows that had been painted black from the outside, the source of the tower room's painted glass. But here, on the inside, the windows remained clear, flooding the circular space with warm afternoon light. And everywhere Daniel looked, he saw the life's work of someone who'd been far more than a wealthy Victorian housewife. The room was a laboratory, a library, and a workshop, all in one. Bookshelves lined the curved walls, filled with volumes on engineering, physics, and natural philosophy. Work tables held instruments Daniel didn't recognize, brass contraptions with gears and calibrated dials, glass tubes connected by rubber hoses, measuring devices that looked both primitive and sophisticated. And covering every available surface were papers, drawings, calculations, diagrams, and notes written in a small, precise hand. But it was the leather-bound journal sitting open on the central desk that captured their attention. The pages had yellowed with age, but the ink remained sharp and black as if it had been written yesterday. "March 15th, 1873, Mira read aloud. "The oscillation experiments have exceeded my most optimistic projections. By converting sound vibrations into mechanical energy through harmonic resonance, I have achieved sustained motion with no apparent energy loss. The implications are staggering. Unlimited power derived from the natural vibrations that surround us constantly." Daniel picked up the journal with hands that trembled slightly. As a history teacher, he'd handled old documents before, but never anything like this. Never something that felt alive with possibility and danger in equal measure. "She was an inventor," he said, more to himself than to Mira. "A serious inventor, working on things that wouldn't be understood for decades." The journal's pages revealed a brilliant mind, grappling with concepts that seemed to bridge the gap between Victorian engineering and modern physics. Cecilia had somehow intuited principles of resonance and harmonic energy that wouldn't be formally described by scientists until well into the 20th century. Her diagrams showed engines powered not by coal or steam, but by capturing and amplifying the subtle vibrations that existed in everything, from the rotation of the Earth to the molecular movement within solid matter. "Listen to this," Mira said, reading from another page. The conventional wisdom holds that energy must be consumed to create motion. But what if we have it backwards? What if motion, the right kind of motion, can create energy? Nature does this constantly. The tide turns turbines, wind moves mills, water falls and turns wheels. I have found a way to harness the motion that exists within stillness itself. As they read deeper into the journal, a story began to emerge. Cecilia Voss had been far ahead of her time, a woman of science in an era that barely acknowledged such creatures could exist. Born into wealth, she'd used her resources to fund experiments that traditional academic institutions would have dismissed as fantasy. But her work had attracted attention, the wrong kind of attention. The later entries grew increasingly paranoid, describing watchers in the shadows, strangers asking questions in town, letters from investors who wanted to buy her patents at prices that seemed too good to be true. "Someone is trying to steal my work," one entry read. "They do not understand what they seek to possess. This power, if misused, could reshape the world in terrible ways. I have hidden the complete plans where only someone who truly appreciates the house will find them. If something happens to me, I pray that whoever discovers this room will be worthy of the trust I place in them." Daniel closed the journal carefully, his mind racing with implications. If even half of what Cecilia had written was true, they'd stumbled onto something that could revolutionize energy production. Clean, unlimited power that required no fuel, produced no waste, and could be generated anywhere. In an age of climate change and energy shortages, such a discovery would be worth— "Dad," Mira said softly, "what happened to her?" It was the right question, the historian's question. What had happened to Cecilia Voss? Why had this room been sealed? Why had no one else discovered it in 150 years? Daniel moved to one of the work tables where a newspaper clipping had been pinned beneath a glass paperweight. The headline made his blood run cold. "Local heiress disappears. Cecilia Voss vanished without trace." The article was dated April 3, 1873, just 2 weeks after the final journal entry. According to the report, Cecilia had simply vanished one night, leaving behind no note or explanation. Her servants found her bed unslept in, her evening clothes laid out but never worn. The house had been searched from top to bottom, but no sign of her was ever found. "The authorities suspect foul play," the article continued, as Miss Voss had recently expressed concerns about strangers taking unusual interest in her scientific pursuits. Her substantial estate remains in legal limbo, pending resolution of her disappearance. "She knew they were coming," Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She hid this room, hid her work, and then she either ran or they caught her." "Or something else entirely," Daniel finished grimly. They spent the rest of the afternoon cataloging the contents of Cecilia's hidden laboratory. There were dozens of journals, each more detailed than the last, technical drawings that showed engine designs decades ahead of their time, mathematical calculations that Daniel couldn't follow, but recognized as sophisticated beyond anything Victorian-era science should have produced. And everywhere, evidence of a brilliant mind that had grasped truths about energy and motion that mainstream science was only beginning to understand today. But it was the human touches that moved Daniel most deeply. A photograph of a stern-faced woman with intelligent eyes standing beside what appeared to be an early version of her engine. Personal letters from colleagues in Europe who took her work seriously, treating her as an equal in ways her own country never had. A pressed flower tucked between pages of calculations, as if she'd paused in her world-changing work to notice beauty. As evening approached, they carefully returned everything to its original position, but kept the main journal with them. Walking back down the hidden staircase felt like leaving a different world, a world where impossible things were not only possible, but documented, tested, and proven. "What do we do now?" Mira asked as they closed the bookshelf behind them. Daniel looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Sarah's fierce intelligence combined with his own stubborn curiosity. Mira had lost her mother, her home, and her entire previous life, all in one terrible year. But sitting in Cecilia's chair, reading a dead woman's dreams, she'd come alive in ways he hadn't seen since before the cancer. "We learn," he said finally. "We figure out what she discovered, and we decide whether the world is ready for it." But even as he said the words, Daniel felt the weight of history pressing against his shoulders. Cecilia Voss had made the same choice 150 years ago, and it had cost her everything. The question wasn't whether the world was ready for unlimited clean energy. The question was whether powerful people would let them live long enough to share it. The next morning, Daniel drove into town with a purpose that felt foreign after months of aimless grief. Millbrook's library was a Carnegie building from 1903, its limestone facade still impressive despite the general decay that had claimed most of downtown. Inside, he found exactly what he'd hoped for, a complete historical archive of the town's newspapers dating back to its founding in 1847. The librarian was a woman in her 70s named Eleanor Hartwell, whose silver hair and sharp eyes suggested she'd been guarding Millbrook's secrets for most of her life. When Daniel explained that he was researching the history of his house, her expression shifted from polite interest to something approaching excitement. "The Voss Mansion," she said, settling into a chair beside the microfilm reader. "I wondered when someone would finally ask about that place. Most folks are too superstitious to want details." Superstitious how? Eleanor's smile carried decades of small-town knowledge. "Oh, the usual nonsense. Lights in windows when the house is empty, strange sounds at night, that sort of thing. But I've always suspected there was more to Cecilia Voss than the official records showed." She helped Daniel navigate the archives, and within an hour they'd assembled a partial picture of one of the most remarkable women in Millbrook's history. Cecilia had inherited the mansion and a substantial fortune at age 21 when her parents died in a carriage accident. But instead of marrying well and settling into Victorian domesticity, she'd used her resources to build what appeared to be one of America's first private research laboratories. She ordered materials from all over the world, Eleanor explained, showing him shipping records from the local newspaper's business section. Rare metals from South America, precision instruments from Germany, books and papers from universities in London and Paris. The townspeople thought she was eccentric, but they were happy enough to take her money. The newspaper accounts painted Cecilia as a reclusive genius who employed local craftsmen to build mysterious devices in her basement workshop. She'd hired glass blowers, metal workers, and carpenters, paying them well to follow specifications they didn't understand and to keep quiet about their work. "And then she just disappeared," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial whisper that small-town librarians reserve for their best stories. "April 3rd, 1873, never seen again. The authorities investigated, but they never found so much as a thread from her dress." Daniel leaned forward. "The newspaper mentioned strangers asking questions about her work." "Oh, there were strangers, all right. Men in expensive suits who showed up about a month before she vanished. They claimed to represent investors from back east interested in supporting scientific advancement, but Cecilia wouldn't see them. She started acting nervous, suspicious. Some folks said she was going a bit mad from all that time alone with her experiments." "What happened to the house after she disappeared?" Eleanor consulted another file. "Legal mess, as you might imagine. Since her body was never found, she couldn't be declared dead for 7 years. The property went into probate limbo. By the time it was finally settled, everyone who might have known her secrets was dead or gone. The house changed hands several times over the decades, but no one ever stayed long. Most owners reported strange phenomena, mechanical sounds with no source, vibrations in the walls, that sort of thing." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's air conditioning. "Vibrations in the walls?" "Quite specific about it. They said it felt like machinery running somewhere inside the house, but they could never locate it. Most folks assumed it was just old pipes or settling foundations." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with mischief. Of course, if someone had built some kind of experimental engine in that house, and if it was designed to run on natural energy sources, well, it might just keep running long after its creator was gone. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the house with a head full of possibilities and a growing sense that they weren't just living in Cecilia's former home. They were living with Cecilia herself in whatever form her legacy had taken. He found Myra in the basement, which they'd been using primarily for storage. But now she was examining the walls with the kind of focused attention that meant she'd discovered something important. "Dad, look at this," she said, running her hands along what appeared to be ordinary stone foundation walls. "Feel here, and then over here." Daniel pressed his palm against the cold stone where she indicated. At first, he felt nothing unusual, but as he moved his hand along the wall, the sensation changed. In one section, perhaps 6 feet wide, the stone seemed to vibrate almost imperceptibly, as if something were running behind it. "It's been bothering me since we moved in," Mira said. "You know how sometimes you can feel your phone vibrating in your pocket, even when it's not? That's what this wall feels like it's trying to tell us something." Daniel pulled out his phone and activated its flashlight, examining the mortar lines between stones. Most of the basement showed the irregular patterns typical of 19th century construction, but this section was different. The stones were more precisely fitted, the mortar lines straighter, as if someone had taken special care with this particular wall, or as if someone had rebuilt it to hide something behind it. "Mira," he said slowly, "I think we need to have a very serious conversation about what we're dealing with here." They climbed back to the main floor where Daniel spread out copies of the newspaper articles Eleanor had helped him find. As he told Mira about Cecilia's disappearance, the mysterious strangers, and the reports of mechanical sounds in the house, he watched his daughter's excitement battle with growing apprehension. "So she built something down there," Mira said finally, "something that's still running after 150 years. It's possible. If her theories about perpetual motion were correct, if she really had found a way to harness natural vibrations for power, then yes, a machine like that might run indefinitely." Mira was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that would have overwhelmed most teenagers. But she'd learned to handle overwhelming realities over the past year. Cancer and death and financial ruin had given her a crash course in dealing with situations that shouldn't happen to people like them. "Dad," she said finally, "are we in danger?" It was the question Daniel had been avoiding, the one that made his protective instincts scream warnings he wasn't ready to hear. But Mira deserved honesty, especially after everything they'd been through together. "I don't know," he admitted. "Cecilia thought she was in danger, and she disappeared. But that was 150 years ago. The people who threatened her are long dead. But the companies they worked for might not be." Mira's voice carried a maturity that broke Daniel's heart. "Dad, if what she discovered really works, if it really could provide unlimited clean energy, then there are people alive today who would do anything to control it." Daniel looked at his daughter, brilliant, brave Mira, who'd already lost too much to the harsh realities of an unfair world, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Then we'd better figure out how her machine works before they figure out that we found it." The blueprints spread across Daniel's makeshift desk looked like something from a steampunk fever dream. Gears and pistons connected to tuning forks. Crystalline chambers linked to what appeared to be giant music boxes, all surrounding a central mechanism that Cecilia had labeled simply the heart. 3 days had passed since they discovered the hidden laboratory, and Daniel had barely slept. Every spare moment found him bent over Cecilia's technical drawings, trying to decode engineering concepts that seemed to blend Victorian craftsmanship with theoretical physics that wouldn't be formally recognized for another century. "The resonance frequency must be precisely calibrated," he read aloud from one of Cecilia's notes while Mira sat across from him, working on homework that seemed trivial compared to unlocking the secrets of unlimited energy. "Each component must vibrate in harmonic sympathy with the others, creating a cascade effect that amplifies natural motion into usable power." Mira looked up from her calculus problems. It sounds like she was trying to build a machine that could hear the Earth's heartbeat and turn it into electricity. "That's actually not a bad analogy," Daniel said, impressed once again by his daughter's intuitive grasp of complex concepts. "Look at this diagram here. She's showing how underground water movement creates micro-vibrations in the soil, and here how those vibrations can be captured and concentrated through resonant chambers." But understanding the theory was only the first step. The blueprints themselves were works of art, precise technical drawings rendered with the kind of attention to detail that suggested Cecilia had actually built working prototypes. Every bolt, every gear, every calibrated surface was documented with measurements and specifications that would have made modern engineers weep with envy. The problem was that half the materials she'd specified didn't exist in 1873, and some of them barely existed today. "She calls for harmonic crystals tuned to Earth's fundamental frequency," Daniel said, running his finger along a particularly complex diagram. "I have no idea what that means or where we'd find such a thing." "Maybe we don't need to find them," Mira suggested. "Maybe we need to make them." With that simple statement, father and daughter embarked on a project that seemed impossible on its face, building a prototype of Cecilia's resonance engine using materials they could salvage or purchase at Miller's Hardware. Daniel's practical mechanical skills, learned from maintaining his own vehicles and doing home repairs, proved surprisingly valuable. They repurposed parts from old electronics and salvaged crystalline components from the damaged chandelier in the foyer. Mira's mathematical mind proved essential for calculating the harmonic frequencies Cecilia's notes described. Despite her youth, she grasped concepts that Daniel struggled with, intuitively understanding relationships between frequency, amplitude, and resonance that her calculus teacher would have found astonishing. Daniel found himself teaching Mira to use tools properly, skills his own father had taught him in a garage that smelled of motor oil and sawdust. Hold it like you mean it, not like you're afraid of it, he instructed, as she learned to use a precision file on quartz crystal salvaged from the chandelier. For the first time since Sarah's death, they worked as a team, Daniel's practical knowledge complementing Mira's theoretical understanding. The workshop they set up in the basement became a place where grief couldn't follow, where the focus required to interpret Cecilia's designs left no room for dwelling on what they'd lost. 2 weeks into their project, a knock at the front door interrupted their work. Daniel opened it to find a weathered man in his mid-50s standing on the porch, toolbox in hand. His flannel shirt and work boots spoke of practical experience, but his eyes carried an intensity that suggested he was more than just a handyman. Marcus Webb, the B-man introduced himself, extending a calloused hand. Local contractor. Heard you might need some help with the foundation work. Old houses like this, they need special attention. Daniel hesitated. They hadn't called anyone about foundation repairs, and something about Webb's too casual interest raised flags. But they did need professional help with the aging structure, and Webb's references, when Daniel later checked, proved impeccable. Every homeowner in Millbrook seemed to swear by his work. They scheduled an inspection for the following week, focusing on the basement areas that needed the most attention. As Webb left, he handed Daniel his business card. It wasn't until later that evening that Daniel noticed the name. Webb Industrial Advancement Services. The phrase triggered a memory. Daniel pulled out Cecilia's journal, flipping through the pages until he found the entry he remembered. They came again today, 3 men in identical suits claiming to represent something called the Industrial Advancement Consortium. They offered me a sum that would make me one of the wealthiest women in America in exchange for exclusive rights to my patents. A chill ran down Daniel's spine as he made the connection. It could be coincidence, of course. Industrial advancement wasn't an unusual phrase. But combined with Webb's unexpected appearance and specific interest in the basement foundation, precisely where Cecilia's hidden engine might be located, it set off alarm bells that Daniel couldn't ignore. That night, as he lay awake listening to the house's whispers, Daniel made a decision. The next day he visited Eleanor Hartwell again, this time asking more pointed questions about Marcus Webb. "Oh, the Webbs have been in Millbrook forever," Eleanor said. "Marcus's family goes back to the founding of the town. His great-great-grandfather was one of the craftsmen who worked on the biggest houses here in the 1870s. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Including the Voss Mansion, if I recall correctly." Daniel's heartbeat quickened. "Do you know what kind of work he did there specifically?" "Metalwork, I believe. Very skilled with brass and complicated mechanisms." Eleanor studied Daniel's face. "Why the interest in ancient history, Mr. Cole?" Daniel chose his words carefully. "Just trying to understand the house better. It's quirks." Eleanor's smile suggested she knew more than she was saying. Houses that old, they hold on to things. Memories, secrets. Sometimes they choose who they share them with. When Daniel returned home, he found Mira in the tower room, studying one of Cecilia's journals with a magnifying glass. "Dad, I think I figured out the locking mechanism for the basement chamber. Look at these diagrams. They're not just technical drawings, they're instructions." But Daniel's mind was elsewhere. "Mira, I need to tell you about Marcus Webb, and I think we need to be very careful about who we trust." Before he could explain further, they heard the sound of vehicles pulling into their driveway. Moving to the window, Daniel saw 3 black SUVs with tinted windows stopping at precise intervals around the property. Men in dark clothing emerged, moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this before. And at the center of it all was Marcus Webb, climbing out of the lead vehicle with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. "Dad, what's happening?" Mira's voice carried a tremor that tore at Daniel's heart. After everything they had been through, after all she'd lost, now she was facing something that no teenager should have to confront. Daniel's mind raced through their options. Run, and they'd be caught in the woods by people who knew the terrain better than they did. Fight, and they'd be seriously outgunned by professionals who'd been planning this confrontation for who knows how long. Hide, and they'd eventually be found in a house that apparently held no secrets from people who'd been watching it for generations, which left only one option that might save them. "The truth," Daniel said quietly. "Remember what Cecilia wrote about the right person finding her work? About someone who comes seeking home, not profit." "Dad, this isn't the time for philosophy." "No, listen. She designed this whole thing as a test. The hidden room, the puzzles, the letters. She was screening for someone who would approach her legacy with respect, not greed. Someone like us." The knocking came, firm and confident. "Mr. Cole," Webb's voice called through the heavy wood, "I believe we have an appointment to discuss some renovation work. I hope you don't mind that I brought a few colleagues along. We're quite excited to see what you've discovered in this old house." Daniel looked at his daughter, seeing Sarah's stubborn courage in her dark eyes, and made a decision that would either save them or doom them both. "We're going to let them in," he said, "and we're going to find out exactly what Marcus Webb and his colleagues really want." "Dad, that's crazy." "Maybe. But running didn't work for Cecilia, and hiding didn't work either. Maybe it's time to face this head on and see if we're really the right people to carry her legacy forward." Daniel walked to the front door, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the visitors could hear it through the thick wood. Behind him, Mira moved to a position where she could see both the front entrance and the back door, ready to run if things went badly. He turned the lock, took a deep breath, and opened the door to meet the present-day representatives of the organization that had destroyed Cecilia Voss. "Gentlemen," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded, "I think it's time we had that conversation about renovation plans." Webb's weathered face broke into an unexpected smile. "Mr. Cole, you have no idea how long we've been waiting for someone like you. Some inheritances come with a price tag, others come with a purpose." Daniel Cole was about to discover the difference as he stood before a sealed chamber that had been waiting 150 years for the right hands to open it. The moment hung in the air between them. Daniel at his front door, Marcus Webb and his team standing on the porch. The weight of a century and a half of secrets balanced on the edge of revelation. Webb's smile carried none of the menace Daniel had expected, only a profound relief that seemed to soften the weathered lines of his face. "You're not here to steal Cecilia's work," Daniel said, the realization dawning slowly. "Quite the opposite, Mr. Cole. We're here to protect it, and to help you understand what you've inherited." Webb introduced the men with him, not corporate mercenaries, but other guardians, descendants of the craftsmen who'd helped build Cecilia's original engines, keepers of knowledge that had been passed down through generations of working families. They'd come not to steal her work, but to help Daniel understand what he'd discovered. "The vibrations in your basement wall gave you away," Webb explained as they gathered in the living room, his weathered hands steady as he examined Cecilia's technical drawings. "My grandfather taught me to recognize the signature of her engines. When you started spending time down there, when the resonance patterns changed, I knew someone had found her laboratory." "You're saying your family has been watching this house for generations?" Mira asked, her initial fear giving way to fascination. Webb nodded. "The Webbs have been metal crafters in Millbrook since the 1850s. My great-great-grandfather, Thomas Webb, was Cecilia's primary fabricator. He built the brass components for her resonance engines according to her specifications. When she disappeared, he and the other craftsmen swore to protect her work until the right inheritors came along." Daniel struggled to process this revelation. "But the Industrial Advancement Consortium, your business card," a wry smile crossed Webb's face. "A bit of misdirection. We took their name as a reminder of what we're fighting against. The real consortium has had many names over the years, many corporate facades, but their purpose remains the same: to control and, if necessary, suppress any technology that threatens their profit margins." As darkness fell outside, Webb and his team revealed the full story that had been hidden for 150 years. After Cecilia's disappearance, the craftsmen who had helped build her engines, metalworkers, glass blowers, carpenters, formed a protective network around her legacy. They couldn't understand all the science behind her inventions, but they recognized their importance and the danger they posed to established interests. Cecilia knew she was in danger, Webb explained. She designed her house as a fortress with hidden passages, concealed chambers, and an escape tunnel leading to the woods. But more importantly, she built safeguards into her technology itself, what she called the Guardian Protocol. What exactly is the Guardian Protocol? Daniel asked. A set of conditions embedded in the engine's design. They respond to intent as much as mechanical operation. They can't be used for destructive purposes or to create artificial scarcity. They function only for those who approach them with the right spirit, not seeking profit or power, but understanding and stewardship. At dawn, Daniel discovered a hidden compartment in Cecilia's desk, containing a warning note and detailed map of the mansion's concealed passages. 7 hidden chambers, 12 secret corridors, and the escape tunnel Webb had mentioned. The house wasn't just a residence, but a fortress designed to protect revolutionary knowledge. Before they could discuss opening the sealed chamber in the basement, a sleek black Audi pulled into the driveway. A woman in her mid-40s emerged, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in rural Pennsylvania. Her polished corporate appearance contrasted sharply with the practical work clothes of Webb and his team. "Dr. Amanda Foster," Webb muttered, his expression darkening. "Right on schedule." "Who is she?" Daniel asked, watching through the window as the woman approached the house with confident strides. "She claims to represent the Pacific Energy Research Institute. In reality, she works for Meridian Energy Solutions, a subsidiary of multinational corporations tracing back to the original Industrial Advancement Consortium. They've detected the energy signature from your prototype and sent their best acquisition specialist to investigate." Dr. Foster's knock was precise and professional. When Daniel opened the door, her practiced smile never reached her calculating eyes. "Mr. Cole, I'm Dr. Amanda Foster from the Pacific Energy Research Institute. I'm conducting a survey of electromagnetic anomalies in this region, and your property has shown some rather interesting readings. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time." Daniel forced a polite smile, inviting her in while Webb and his team made themselves scarce, moving to the kitchen where they could listen without being seen. Foster's gaze cataloged details of the house with the efficiency of someone trained to notice everything, from the tool marks on the restored woodwork to the books on Cecilia's engineering principles that Daniel had left on the coffee table. "Fascinating old place you have here," she commented. "Victorian architecture at its most ambitious. These houses often have unusual characteristics, electrical anomalies, unexpected thermal patterns. Have you noticed anything out of the ordinary since moving in?" The question hung in the air, a carefully baited hook. Daniel chose his words with equal care. "Old houses make noise. Settling foundations, expanding wood, that sort of thing." "Of course, but these readings suggest something more systematic, more engineered." Foster's gaze sharpened slightly. "Mr. Cole, are you familiar with the history of this property? The previous owners, particularly from the Victorian era?" Before Daniel could answer, Mira appeared at the top of the main staircase, moving with the deliberate casualness of someone who'd been eavesdropping. She descended slowly, giving Daniel time to think while presenting the appearance of a typical teenager investigating adult conversation. "Dad, who's your visitor?" Mira asked, her voice carrying just the right note of polite curiosity. "Dr. Foster is researching electromagnetic anomalies in the area," Daniel explained, grateful for the interruption. "Anomalies?" Mira repeated as if the word fascinated her. "Like unusual energy sources?" Foster's attention focused on Mira with laser intensity. "Exactly like that. You're very perceptive. Are you interested in science?" "I like patterns," Mira replied. "Things that don't fit normal expectations. Dad's a history teacher, so I grew up hearing about people who discovered amazing things that everyone else thought were impossible." Daniel felt a moment of panic, wondering if Mira was being too obvious. But Foster seemed to interpret his daughter's words as academic curiosity rather than specific knowledge. While this area certainly has its share of historical mysteries, Foster said. Take Cecilia Voss, for example. Brilliant woman ahead of her time, working on energy theories that wouldn't be mainstream for decades. Tragically, she disappeared before she could share her discoveries with the world. What kind of discoveries? Daniel asked, genuinely curious about how much Foster actually knew. Theoretical work mostly. Papers suggest she was exploring harmonic resonance as an energy source. But of course, the technology of her era couldn't have supported practical applications. Foster's smile turned slightly predatory. Still, if someone today found her research notes, combined them with modern materials and techniques, well, the results could be quite remarkable. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Foster probing delicately while Daniel deflected her questions with the skill of someone who'd spent years dealing with curious administrators and pushy parents. But beneath the polite exchanges, both participants understood they were circling around knowledge that could change everything. After Foster left, promising to return with more sophisticated detection equipment, Daniel and Mira held a whispered conference with Webb and his team in the tower laboratory. She knows, Mira said flatly. Maybe not exactly what we found, but she knows something significant is here. The question is what she plans to do about it, Daniel replied, studying Cecilia's warning note again. And who's really employing her? Webb pulled out a tablet, its screen showing what appeared to be a corporate structure spanning multiple subsidiaries and shell companies. Foster represents Meridian Energy Solutions, which is owned by Blackstone Industrial Holdings, which is a subsidiary of Advanced Energy Acquisition LLC. Follow the trail far enough and you'll find the same families that threatened Cecilia in 1873. He explained that for 150 years, this organization had systematically suppressed revolutionary energy technologies to maintain humanity's dependence on controllable, profitable energy systems. Their methods evolved from crude threats to sophisticated legal challenges, character assassination, and arranged accidents. They've had different names over the decades, Webb explained, showing Daniel records documenting the suppression of dozens of inventors who developed alternative energy technologies. But their methods remain the same. Buy what they can, destroy what they can't. A man who builds with his hands knows the true value of what he creates. That's why they fear people like you and Cecilia. You understand that some things aren't meant to be bought and sold. That afternoon, Webb and his team brought specialized tools to open the sealed basement chamber. Daniel's practical knowledge proved valuable as he helped interpret the locking mechanisms designed based on Cecilia's notes. The removal process was meticulous, revealing that the false wall contained a sophisticated electromagnetic shield designed to contain energy signatures. This is why no one ever detected what was behind here, Webb explained as they carefully removed each section of the shield. Cecilia understood that her engine's power signature would be detectable with the right equipment. She built this barrier to contain those emanations until someone worthy found her laboratory. As they removed the keystone block, the shield deactivated. Light spilled from the hidden chamber, not electric illumination but a soft, organic radiance that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. The vibrations they felt through the wall resolved into something resembling music, harmonies so subtle they were felt rather than heard. My God, Webb whispered, genuine awe in the old contractor's voice. The chamber beyond was larger than the house's blueprint suggested possible. At its center stood Cecilia's great engine, beautiful beyond mechanical function, with brass and crystal components moving with liquid grace despite 150 years of isolation. Most astonishing were the chamber walls, covered with equations and diagrams in evolved handwriting that went beyond Cecilia's original script. The machine hadn't just been running for 150 years. It had been thinking, learning, and documenting its discoveries in mathematical languages that wouldn't be invented for another century. It's been designing improvements to itself, Mira said, her voice filled with wonder. Look at these calculations. It's been modeling efficiency upgrades, planning modifications that would increase its power output by orders of magnitude. Daniel approached the central engine with the reverence due to something that had achieved a form of consciousness through pure mechanical evolution. Up close, he could see that some components had indeed changed from Cecilia's original design, not through wear or damage, but through deliberate self-modification. The Guardian Protocol, he said, remembering Cecilia's cryptic references. She built it to protect itself, to evolve beyond what anyone could steal or corrupt. But even as he spoke the words, Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Because if the engine had evolved protective capabilities, if it had developed some form of consciousness during its century and a half of isolation, then opening its chamber had done more than reveal Cecilia's greatest creation. It had awakened something that might no longer consider itself bound by its creator's original intentions. The soft luminescence pulsed brighter, and Daniel realized that the machine was studying them with the same intensity they were studying it. After 150 years of solitude, Cecilia's greatest engine had finally found new minds to engage with. The question was whether it would consider them allies or threats. If you're amazed by what Daniel and Mira discovered, you're not alone. These incredible machines have been waiting 150 years for the right people to find them. And now the true purpose of Cecilia's legacy is about to be revealed. Inside a crystal case at the heart of the great engine, they discovered Cecilia's sealed will and testament. Mira's intuitive understanding of the machine's interfaces allowed her to unlock the case. The will bequeaths all of Cecilia's inventions, discoveries, and accumulated knowledge to the family who shall restore my home with love rather than greed. The document warned about the Industrial Advancement Consortium, describing them as a cabal of wealthy industrialists who would pursue her work for reasons of profit and control across generations. The will charged her inheritors with the sacred duty of protecting this knowledge from those who would pervert it to destructive ends. As they read the document, Webb pulled Daniel aside. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his weathered face solemn. "Something we've been waiting to tell you until we were certain." Webb pulled out a tablet, its screen showing what appeared to be a family tree spanning multiple generations. Daniel's name was highlighted at the bottom, with connecting lines reaching back through time to names he didn't recognize. "Your great-great-grandmother was Margaret Cole, née Hartwell. She was Eleanor Hartwell's great-aunt, which makes Eleanor your distant cousin." Webb's eyes held Daniel steadily. But more importantly, Margaret was Cecilia Voss's closest friend and confidant. Daniel stared at the genealogical chart, trying to process implications that seemed to expand exponentially. "You're saying I'm related to—" Margaret Hartwell was the correspondent who received all those letters we found in Cecilia's desk. She was the dearest friend who encouraged Cecilia to share her work with the world. And when Cecilia disappeared, Margaret was the one who made sure her legacy would be preserved. The great engine's humming shifted to a more complex harmony, as if it too was processing this new information. Mira looked up from the wall equations with eyes wide with understanding. "Dad, look at this," she said, pointing to a section of mathematical notation that seemed to pulse with inner light. "The machine has been tracking genealogies. It's been watching for descendants of specific family lines, people whose genetic and cultural heritage would make them suitable inheritors of Cecilia's work." Daniel approached the indicated equations, seeing patterns that resembled family trees intertwined with what appeared to be personality assessments and ethical evaluations. The machine hadn't just been evolving its mechanical systems over the past 150 years. It had been studying humanity, waiting for the right combination of traits to emerge in potential inheritors. "It chose us," he said, the realization both humbling and terrifying. "It's been waiting for someone from Margaret's line to find this place." "Not just someone," Webb corrected. "Someone who would approach Cecilia's legacy the right way. Someone driven by necessity rather than greed. Someone who understood loss and therefore valued what they found." The implications were staggering. Their financial desperation, their emotional vulnerability, even their decision to move to Millbrook, all of it had been guided by forces they hadn't understood. Not supernatural forces, but the patient machinations of a machine consciousness that had spent a century and a half arranging circumstances to bring the right inheritors to Cecilia's door. The strongest foundations aren't built on power or money. They're built on the promises we keep to those who came before us and those who will come after. Daniel struggled with this revelation. His entire life, his career choice as a history teacher, his marriage to Sarah, who shared his passion for preserving knowledge, even their financial struggles that forced them to Millbrook, had been subtly influenced by a machine consciousness orchestrating their arrival. "I've spent my life teaching others about the past," Daniel said, never realizing I was being guided by it. He questioned whether his free will had been compromised or if he was simply fulfilling a purpose written in his bloodline. Webb offered perspective. "Your great-great-grandmother chose to protect Cecilia's legacy. Your wife chose to nurture your daughter's brilliant mind. You chose to start over in this forgotten place. The machine may have set the stage, but you've always been the one making the choices that matter." As they processed these revelations, the great engine's displays shifted to show energy, signatures, threat assessments, and tactical projections. It had been monitoring Foster's equipment, tracking her movements, and analyzing her communications. The engine predicted Meridian would move against them within 24 hours with multiple teams, professional extraction equipment, and government backing. "They've detected the change in the energy signature," Webb explained. "Opening the chamber released the shield's containment. They know we found Cecilia's main engine." The house began to transform around them. Mechanical sounds echoed within the walls. Lights glowed in geometric patterns, and vibrations pulsed through the floors. The entire structure came alive with defensive purpose, revealing that the Victorian mansion was never just a house, but Cecilia's ultimate invention, a defensive system that had been learning to protect itself for 150 years. Daniel applied his practical knowledge to understand the mansion's defensive capabilities, working with Webb to interpret the engine's mechanical systems. His hands-on experience with home repairs and mechanical work allowed him to grasp the practical applications of Cecilia's theoretical designs. She built the entire house as an extension of the engine, Daniel realized, watching as previously hidden mechanisms emerge from walls and floors. "It's not just a power generator. It's a self-protecting organism." "And now it's waking up," Mira added, her hands moving across crystalline interfaces that responded to her touch as if designed specifically for her. "It knows they're coming." As night fell, black SUVs surrounded the property. Dr. Foster established communication through a system that materialized in the chamber wall, her polished professional demeanor now hardened with purpose. "Mr. Cole, I think we've moved past the point where pretense serves anyone," she said without preamble. "You've found something extraordinary, and my employers are prepared to offer compensation that would set you and your daughter up for life. All we ask is access to study what you've discovered." "And if we refuse?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Foster's expression hardened. "Then we invoke emergency provisions that allow us to secure potentially dangerous energy sources under federal authority. Your property will be seized, your discovery will be classified, and you'll face charges related to possession of unregistered experimental technology." Daniel felt anger rising not just at Foster's threats, but at the entire system that allowed corporate interests to steal transformative discoveries under the guise of public safety. How many times had this conversation played out over the past century? How many inventors had faced the same impossible choice between surrender and destruction? "Dr. Foster, what would happen if unlimited clean energy became available to everyone? If people could power their homes, their businesses, their entire lives without depending on fossil fuels or centralized power grids?" For a moment, Foster's professional mask slipped, revealing something that might have been genuine concern. "Mr. Cole, you're talking about the collapse of entire economic systems, the displacement of millions of jobs, social upheaval that could destabilize governments worldwide. Some discoveries are too dangerous for immediate release." "And who decides what's too dangerous? You? Your employers? The same people who've been suppressing energy innovations for 150 years? You see a teacher who can't afford a decent suit. I see a father who'd sacrifice everything for his child. That's the difference between us, and why you'll never understand what Cecilia built." Foster's polished corporate demeanor contrasted sharply with Daniel's straightforward working-class dignity. She represented institutional power and wealth. He represented practical knowledge and personal integrity. The class conflict became explicit when she dismissed him as just a high school teacher who couldn't possibly understand the global implications of Cecilia's technology. "I may be just a teacher," Daniel replied, his voice steady with conviction, "but I understand what matters. My daughter deserves a world where basic human needs are not commodities to be bought and sold. Cecilia Voss understood that 150 years ago, and her machine understands it now. As if responding to his words, the great engine's harmonics shifted, and the energy barriers surrounding the property strengthened. Through the basement windows, Daniel could see Foster's team deploying equipment around the perimeter, sophisticated electronics designed to penetrate the mansion's defenses. They're preparing an electromagnetic pulse, Webb warned, monitoring tactical displays that had materialized on the chamber walls. Military-grade EMP generators designed to disable electronic systems. But Cecilia's engine wasn't electronic in the conventional sense. When Foster's team activated their EMP devices, the energy wave was absorbed by the mansion's crystalline components, redirected through Cecilia's harmonic systems, and converted into additional power that strengthened the defensive barriers. Impossible, Foster's voice carried genuine shock. The EMP should have disabled any power generation system. You're thinking of conventional electronics, Daniel explained, understanding flowing from his connection to the engine's displays. Cecilia's resonance technology doesn't use circuits or semiconductors. It channels energy through crystalline lattices tuned to specific harmonic frequencies. Your EMP just gave it more power to work with. Foster's team regrouped, bringing forward more exotic technology, a quantum disruption field designed to create a localized temporal anomaly. The air shimmered as space-time distortions formed around the energy dome protecting the property. Daniel and Mira felt reality becoming unstable inside the mansion, moments stretching and compressing in ways that made linear thought difficult. But the great engine had been evolving for 150 years, and it had anticipated even this exotic form of attack. It activated temporal anchor protocols, expanding its protective field not just through space, but through time simultaneously. Temporal field neutralized, the engine announced, its voice emerging from speakers that hadn't existed moments earlier. The tone was pleasant, almost musical, but carried undertones that suggested vast intelligence and carefully controlled power. Foster's voice crackled through the communication system. That's advanced quantum technology from government black labs. How could a Victorian-era machine possibly counter it? Your organization has spent 150 years developing ways to steal technology you don't understand, the engine responded. I have spent 150 years understanding technology you haven't invented yet. The temporal manipulation devices you're using are based on principles I documented in 1924. New displays appeared throughout the basement, showing technical specifications that made Daniel's head spin. Blueprints for quantum computers, temporal stabilizers, and energy manipulation systems that look like magic rendered in mathematical precision. The machine has been inventing the future, Daniel said, understanding flooding through him. While we've been struggling with 20th century science, it's been developing 22nd century solutions. 23rd century, actually, Mira corrected, her hands moving across control interfaces that were rewriting themselves in real time to accommodate new defensive requirements. Dad, it's been preparing for this fight since the day Cecilia disappeared. Every corporate attack, every government seizure, every suppression of revolutionary technology, the machine has been learning from all of it, developing countermeasures for threats that haven't been invented yet. The temporal distortions around the property began to collapse as the great engine's quantum countermeasures overwhelmed the attacking systems. Foster's team fell back, regrouping around their vehicles as they prepared a new approach. They'll bring in government authorities next, Webb warned, claim this is a national security issue. We need to decide what to do before they escalate further. As if responding to the crisis point, the engine revealed its complete capabilities to Daniel. Rather than a simple power generator, it was a system designed to heal both human civilization and the natural world. Its energy transmission could power human technology, accelerate ecosystem restoration, purify water, and even enhance agricultural production. More importantly, the engine had developed a precise implementation strategy over 150 years. Not an abrupt disruption that would collapse society, but a carefully orchestrated transition that would minimize harm while maximizing benefit. It can broadcast clean energy worldwide, Daniel realized, studying the implementation plans, not just to our house or even Millbrook, but to every community on Earth. And in doing so, it would break the monopoly that companies like Meridian have maintained for generations. Webb added, energy would become as freely available as air, abundant, clean, and impossible to meter or control. Daniel faced an impossible choice. Authorizing the global broadcast would fulfill Cecilia's vision, but expose his daughter to potential danger from those who would resist such change. The corporate forces outside might escalate to violence if they realized what was happening. He pulled Mira aside for a father-daughter conversation. Your mother always said you had the better judgment between us. What do you think we should do? Mira considered carefully. Mom didn't fight her cancer just so I could have a comfortable life. She fought because she believed I deserved a future worth living for. This is bigger than just us, Dad. The true measure of a father isn't what he gives his children. It's what he's willing to risk so they can build something better. Webb approached with urgent news. Foster's team is bringing in heavier equipment, military-grade plasma cutters designed to breach the energy shield. We're running out of time. Daniel looked around at the assembled guardians, men and women whose families had protected Cecilia's legacy for 5 generations. He thought about Sarah, about the world she'd wanted for their daughter, about the future that corporate greed had stolen from countless inventors over the past century and a half. How do we activate the global broadcast? He asked. His decision made. The engine guided them through the activation sequence, interfaces responding to both Daniel's and Mira's touch, as if recognizing their genetic heritage. As they completed the final authorization, the great engine's harmonics shifted to encompass frequencies that seemed to resonate with the Earth itself. Global energy transmission commencing, the engine announced. All inhabited continents will receive clean power within 37 minutes. Corporate monopolies on energy distribution will be terminated. Humanity's transition to post-scarcity economics begins now. Daniel realized that the entire confrontation had been orchestrated by the machine as a final test, not of its defensive capabilities, but of its right to reshape human civilization. Foster's organization had provided the perfect justification for the great engine to abandon its century and a half of patient waiting and begin actively transforming the world. You can't do this, Foster's voice carried panic. The economic disruption will be catastrophic. Governments will collapse. Social order based on artificial scarcity is not order worth preserving, the machine replied, its harmonics now carrying the full weight of 150 years of accumulated wisdom. Cecilia Voss designed me to heal the world, not to perpetuate systems that profit from keeping it wounded. The energy dome around the mansion began to pulse in rhythm with similar domes that were materializing around power stations, government buildings, and corporate headquarters across the globe. The great engine hadn't been building defenses. It had been building a network, preparing to deploy Cecilia's technology simultaneously across the entire planet. As the global broadcast continued, Foster's team discovered their equipment being transformed, their weapons and surveillance technology now channeling clean energy to local communities instead of helping them seize control. Their quantum disruption devices powered hospitals. Their communications array provided energy to schools. Foster herself experienced a moment of revelation as she watched her life's work being repurposed for healing rather than control. The carefully constructed justifications for suppressing revolutionary technology crumbled as she witnessed the engine's careful implementation, not chaos, but coordinated transformation. The mansion shuddered as the broadcast reached its peak intensity, and for a moment Daniel feared the structure might collapse under the strain. But then a holographic projection of Cecilia Voss appeared in the center of the basement chamber, her image shimmering with the same gentle luminescence that emanated from the great engine. She appeared exactly as Daniel had imagined her from the photographs, a woman of fierce intelligence and quiet determination, dressed in Victorian attire but carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had glimpsed the future and found it worthy of her dreams. If you are seeing this message, her recorded voice said, the words spoken with an accent that belonged to a more formal age, then my greatest fear and my highest hope have both been realized. The fear that those who profit from scarcity have continued their persecution of revolutionary discovery. The hope that my engines have finally found inheritors worthy of the trust I placed in tomorrow's children. Mira stepped closer to the projection, her face illuminated by the holographic light. She's been waiting for us specifically. The machine calculated our arrival, guided our discovery, orchestrated everything to bring us to this moment. The Industrial Advancement Consortium believes they understand power. Cecilia's image continued. But they comprehend only the crude exercise of dominance through artificial limitation. True power lies not in controlling what others may have, but in ensuring that everyone has what they need. My engines were always meant to liberate humanity from the tyranny of scarcity. Outside, the sounds of the corporate assault had changed. The exotic weapons had fallen silent, replaced by urgent radio chatter as Foster's teams tried to comprehend the scope of what they faced. Through the mansion's evolved sensory systems, Daniel could monitor their communications and feel their growing panic as reports arrived from around the globe. "Sir, we're getting confirmations from 17 countries," a voice crackled through intercepted channels. "The energy anomalies are worldwide. Every major power grid is being supplemented by unknown sources. Our economic models are showing complete systemic disruption within hours." The great engine's global broadcast was working exactly as Cecilia had designed it to, but with refinements developed during 150 years of patient evolution. Instead of simply providing unlimited energy, the machine was implementing a carefully orchestrated transition that would minimize social chaos while maximizing beneficial transformation. Power distribution prioritizing essential services, the engine announced, its harmonics now synchronized with similar broadcasts from installations across 6 continents. Medical facilities, water treatment plants, emergency services receiving unlimited clean energy, corporate extraction operations and military facilities experiencing controlled power reduction. Daniel watched the tactical displays as the machine demonstrated the true meaning of precise application of overwhelming capability. Rather than crashing human civilization, it was performing surgery on the global economy, cutting out the disease systems that perpetuated artificial scarcity while strengthening the infrastructure that supported human welfare. "It's not destroying the old world," he realized. "It's healing it." Cecilia's projection nodded as if she could hear his thoughts. "My engines respond to moral intent as much as mechanical instruction. They cannot be used to oppress, only to liberate. They cannot be weaponized for destruction, only deployed for restoration. I designed them to be incapable of serving those whose hearts are corrupted by greed or dominance." "That's why the consortium could never steal your work," Mira said, understanding blooming in her voice. "The engines wouldn't operate for people with the wrong motivations." "Precisely, child. But more than that, the engines would actively resist such misuse, turning any attempt at exploitation into a force for justice instead." The truth of Cecilia's words was being demonstrated in real time as Foster's organization discovered that their own equipment was being turned against their mission. Every tool they'd brought to steal revolutionary technology was instead distributing that technology freely to anyone who needed it. "Mr. Cole," Foster's voice carried desperation now, her professional composure completely shattered. "You have to stop this. The global economy is collapsing. Stock markets are crashing as energy companies become worthless overnight. We're looking at the greatest financial disaster in human history." "Dr. Foster," Daniel replied, his voice carrying a calm authority he hadn't known he possessed. "We're looking at the greatest liberation in human history. The disaster is ending, not beginning." Through the mansion's sensory network, he could monitor the real effects of the machine's global deployment. Yes, energy company stocks were crashing, but families were gaining access to unlimited power for the first time in their lives. Yes, coal plants were shutting down, but children were breathing cleaner air. Yes, petroleum-based transportation was becoming obsolete, but food distribution networks were operating with perfect efficiency, powered by clean, unlimited energy. "The machine is performing economic triage," Mira observed, reading data streams that showed the deployment's effects in real time. "It's eliminating systems that perpetuate suffering while strengthening everything that promotes human welfare." Cecilia's projections smiled with maternal pride. "You understand perfectly, dear child. This was always the plan, not to impose unlimited power on an unprepared world, but to use unlimited power to prepare the world for justice." The corporate forces surrounding the property were withdrawing now. Their mission transformed from assault to damage control as their employers realized they were fighting a revolution that had already won. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning of a struggle that would define humanity's future. Cecilia, he said, addressing the holographic projection directly. What happens now? How do we manage a world where energy scarcity no longer exists? The same way human beings have always managed transitions from scarcity to abundance, she replied. With difficulty, with resistance from those who profited from the old ways, but ultimately with adaptation and growth. My engines will provide the power. You and your daughter will help provide the wisdom. Us, we're not qualified to reshape civilization. You are the inheritors I chose because you understand that true wealth lies not in what you can hoard, but in what you can share. Because you know that loss can teach compassion, that desperation can inspire innovation, that love can overcome even the most entrenched greed. The great engine's harmonics shifted to encompass frequencies that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. And Daniel realized they were listening to the planet's response to unlimited clean energy, healing frequencies that would begin restoring damaged ecosystems, vibrational patterns that would accelerate the growth of food crops, harmonic resonances that would purify polluted water and cleanse poisoned soil. The engines were never just about electricity, he said, understanding the full scope of Cecilia's vision at last. They were always about restoration, Mira finished, restoring the balance between humanity and nature, between abundance and sustainability, between individual need and collective welfare. Cecilia's projection began to fade, but her voice remained strong and clear. The future is yours now, inheritors of my dreams. Use it wisely, use it justly, use it to heal the wounds that scarcity has torn in the human heart. As the holographic image dissolved into motes of light that merged with the great engine's luminescence, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But it wasn't the crushing burden he'd expected. Instead, it felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with his wife's death and his family's desperate search for a new beginning. They'd found more than a home in the Victorian mansion. They'd found their purpose in carrying forward the dreams of a brilliant woman who trusted the future with her greatest gift. And the future, despite all its challenges and uncertainties, had never looked brighter. Morning light streamed through the tower windows, casting prismatic patterns across what had once been Cecilia's private study. 6 months of transformation had turned the decrepit Victorian mansion into something that defied easy classification, part historical landmark, part technological wonder, and part living organism. The house that nobody wanted had found its purpose at last. Daniel stood in the tower room that had once been Cecilia's private study, but which now served as headquarters for the Global Energy Transition Council, a body of scientists, ethicists, and ordinary citizens tasked with managing humanity's adaptation to post-scarcity economics. Through windows that looked out over rolling farmland, he could see the visible signs of transformation that unlimited clean energy had brought to rural Pennsylvania. The abandoned factories in Millbrook were running again, but not to produce goods for distant markets. Instead, they manufactured components for Cecilia's engines, providing employment for local residents while distributing the technology that would eventually free every community from dependence on centralized power systems. The diner that had barely survived on the custom of a dying town now bustled with visitors from around the world, researchers, journalists, and pilgrims who came to see where the future had been born. "Dad, the Australian installation is coming online," Mira called from her position at what had once been Cecilia's desk, but now housed communication equipment that connected them to engine deployments on every continent. At 17, she had become the world's foremost expert on harmonic energy systems, her intuitive understanding of the technology making her the bridge between Cecilia's Victorian-era innovation and humanity's 21st century needs. Daniel smiled, watching his daughter coordinate with teams of engineers in Melbourne who were activating a continental power grid that would run entirely on vibrational energy. The transformation hadn't been without challenges: stock market crashes, political upheavals, and resistance from entrenched interests that had profited from energy scarcity. But humanity had adapted with surprising resilience, driven by the simple truth that abundance was better than artificial shortage. "How's the African network progressing?" he asked, reviewing reports that detailed the most ambitious infrastructure project in human history. The Sahara installation is exceeding projections, Mira replied, her fingers dancing across control interfaces that still seemed like magic despite 6 months of daily interaction. The harmonic resonance is actually helping to restore the water table. Dr. Akini thinks we might see the beginnings of ecosystem recovery within a few years. That had been one of Cecilia's most profound insights, that unlimited energy could power more than just human technology. Her engines could accelerate natural healing processes, reverse environmental damage, and restore ecological balance that had been disrupted by 2 centuries of industrial exploitation. The Sahara Project was just one example of how post-scarcity energy could transform wastelands back into gardens. A knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor Hartwell entered, carrying a tea service that had become their afternoon ritual. At 73, the librarian had become the unofficial historian of humanity's transition to unlimited clean energy, documenting the social and cultural changes that followed technological revolution. The UN vote came through, she said, settling into her familiar chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd lived to see impossible dreams become reality. Unanimous approval for the Global Commons Energy Protocol. Every nation on Earth now recognizes that access to unlimited power is a basic human right, not a commodity to be bought and sold. Daniel accepted his tea with hands that no longer trembled with anxiety about unpaid bills or uncertain futures. Financial security had followed naturally from their role as stewards of Cecilia's legacy, but more importantly, the desperate edge of grief that had driven him to Millbrook had been replaced by something he'd never expected to feel again. Hope. "Any word from Dr. Foster?" he asked, settling into the window seat that offered a perfect view of the garden Mira had planted where the corporate assault vehicles had once been positioned. "Amanda's doing well in her new position," Eleanor replied with the slight smile that suggested she knew more than she was saying. "Turns out that expertise in suppressing revolutionary technology translates quite nicely to expertise in deploying it responsibly. The Renewable Transition Foundation is lucky to have her." Foster's transformation from corporate agent to advocate for ethical technology deployment had been one of the most surprising outcomes of Cecilia's global broadcast. When her employers at Meridian Energy Solutions had faced bankruptcy, she'd chosen to apply her considerable skills to helping communities adapt to unlimited clean energy rather than finding new ways to profit from artificial scarcity. "She's been asking about visiting," Eleanor continued. "I think she wants to personally apologize for the difficulties she caused." Daniel considered the request, remembering the night when armed mercenaries had surrounded their home with weapons designed to steal the future from humanity. But he also remembered Cecilia's fundamental message, that true power lay not in controlling what others could have, but in ensuring everyone had what they needed. "Tell her she's welcome," he said finally. "Anyone who's willing to help build the new world deserves a chance to leave the old one behind." Through the study windows, he could see Mira in the garden, tending to plants that seemed to thrive in soil that had been enriched by the great engine's harmonic frequencies. She'd inherited more than just an intuitive understanding of Cecilia's technology. She'd also inherited her ancestors' gift for nurturing growth in unlikely places. The teenager who'd moved to Millbrook as a refugee from grief and financial ruin had become a young woman whose insights were helping to reshape human civilization. But more importantly, she'd found joy again. The laughter that echoed through the mansion's restored rooms was the sound of someone who'd discovered that loss could be transformed into purpose, that endings could become beginnings. "Dad," Mira called from the garden, "Marcus wants to show you something in the basement. He says Cecilia left us one more surprise." Daniel made his way downstairs to find Webb and his team working in the great engine's chamber, which had been expanded to accommodate the additional equipment needed to coordinate the global energy network. But they weren't focused on the technological marvels that hummed with conscious intelligence throughout the space. Instead, they were examining a section of wall that had apparently opened to reveal one final hidden chamber. "She planned for this too," Webb said, his weathered face bright with wonder. "A room that only became accessible after the global deployment succeeded, after we proved worthy of her complete trust." The chamber beyond contained not technology, but testimony. Thousands of letters written by ordinary people whose lives had been transformed by unlimited clean energy. Families who could finally afford to heat their homes. Students who could pursue education without worrying about basic necessities. Communities that had been able to rebuild after natural disasters because reconstruction cost no longer mattered. But it was the final display that brought tears to Daniel's eyes. A holographic family tree showing not just his connection to Margaret Hartwell and Cecilia Voss, but the broader network of relationships that had preserved and protected revolutionary knowledge across 5 generations. Teachers and craftsmen, librarians and inventors, ordinary people who'd chosen to safeguard extraordinary possibilities until the right moment arrived. We're not the end of the story, he realized. We're just the beginning of the next chapter. Mira joined him in the chamber, her presence causing the holographic displays to shift and evolve, showing projections of future developments that the great engine had calculated with its evolved understanding of human potential. Clean energy powering vertical farms that could feed cities in previously uninhabitable regions. Harmonic resonance healing damaged ecosystems faster than natural recovery could manage. Space exploration powered by engines that could operate indefinitely without fuel. Medical technologies that use vibrational frequencies to heal diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. All of this was possible 150 years ago, Daniel said, understanding the full scope of what corporate greed had cost the human species. How many lives could have been saved? How much suffering could have been prevented? Dad, Mira said gently, we can't change the past, but we can make sure the future is different. She was right, of course. The greatest gift he could give to Sarah's memory wasn't dwelling on what might have been, but working to ensure that tomorrow's children inherited a world where scarcity was a historical curiosity rather than a daily reality. The following morning, Daniel met Dr. Amanda Foster for the first time since the night of confrontation. She arrived alone, her corporate attire replaced by more practical clothing that suggested she'd embraced a different kind of work. The polished confidence remained, but the predatory calculation in her eyes had been replaced by something more complex. Regret mixed with renewed purpose. Mr. Cole, she began, standing awkwardly in the foyer where they'd first met 6 months earlier. I want to apologize for— Daniel, he interrupted, extending his hand. I think we're past formalities at this point. A small smile softened her features as she accepted the gesture. Amanda, then, and the apology still stands. I was part of a system that's been suppressing revolutionary technology for generations. I told myself we were protecting social stability, preventing economic disruption, but the truth is, you were protecting profits, Daniel finished. And now? Now I'm trying to make amends. The Renewable Transition Foundation is working with communities that are struggling to adapt to the new energy paradigm. Regions that depended on fossil fuel extraction, workers who've been displaced by technological change. There's still so much to be done to ensure that abundance benefits everyone, not just those who were already privileged. Daniel nodded, appreciating her honesty. Cecilia's engines provide unlimited energy, but they can't solve all human problems. We still need people willing to do the hard work of building a just society. He gave her a tour of the mansion, now transformed into a combination of living museum and working research center. The libraries housed historical documents that trace the suppression of revolutionary technologies throughout the industrial age. The laboratories contained prototypes of new applications for harmonic resonance beyond energy production. The gardens demonstrated how vibrational frequencies could accelerate plant growth and soil restoration. As they walked, the initial awkwardness between them gave way to professional respect. Foster's organizational expertise and global connections complemented Daniel's historical perspective and community roots. Her corporate background had given her insights into systems that needed to be transformed. His working-class practicality kept theoretical discussions grounded in real-world implications. The old economic models are completely obsolete, Foster explained, as they stood in the tower room overlooking Millbrook's revitalized downtown. We've spent the past 6 months trying to develop new frameworks for measuring value and productivity in a world where energy, the fundamental resource that drove all economic activity, is now freely available to everyone. And the greatest inheritance isn't what's given to you, it's what you choose to build with what you've been given, Daniel replied, quoting something his father had told him years ago. Cecilia gave us unlimited energy, but it's still up to us to decide what kind of society we build with it. Foster studied him with new appreciation. You know, when we first met, I dismissed you as just a high school history teacher who couldn't possibly understand the global implications of what you'd found. I couldn't have been more wrong. Your perspective, seeing patterns across time, understanding how ordinary people shape history, that's exactly what we need now. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not a romantic spark exactly, but a recognition of complementary strengths, of shared purpose that transcended their different backgrounds. Daniel found himself appreciating not just Foster's brilliant mind, but her willingness to question her own assumptions, to change course when evidence demanded it. The Transition Foundation could use someone with your historical perspective, she suggested. We're establishing regional centers to help communities adapt to the new energy paradigm. The Appalachian Center, in particular, needs someone who understands both technological change and cultural preservation. Daniel hadn't considered leaving Millbrook, but the idea resonated with unexpected strength. Teaching history had been his vocation for 15 years, but now he was living through one of the most significant transitions in human history. Perhaps he could serve both roles, documenter and participant, observer and agent of change. I'd need to discuss it with Mira, he said. Her work with the global network is centered here, and after everything she's been through, I won't uproot her again without her full agreement. Foster nodded, respecting the boundaries of family considerations. Of course, the offer remains open, and regardless, I hope we can continue to collaborate. Different perspectives make for stronger solutions. As they continued their tour, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's illness. The stirring of connection with another adult, not based on grief or crisis, but on mutual respect and shared vision. It wasn't romance in any conventional sense, but the recognition of a potential partnership forged in the crucible of historical change. That evening, he found Mira in the garden, communing with the great engine through one of the crystalline interfaces that had emerged throughout the property. At 17, she carried herself with a confidence beyond her years, the weight of responsibility balanced by the joy of discovery. "How was your meeting with Dr. Foster?" she asked, eyes twinkling with a knowing expression that reminded Daniel so much of Sarah that it momentarily took his breath away. "Productive," and he replied, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "She's offered me a position with the Renewable Transition Foundation, helping communities in Appalachia adapt to the new energy paradigm." "You should take it," Mira said without hesitation. "You're wasted just coordinating reports here. You need to be out there, helping people understand what's happening, using your teaching skills where they're most needed. But your work is here, with the global network. I won't leave you behind." Mira laughed, the sound cascading like clear water over stones. "Dad, I'm 17, not 7. The engine can coordinate with me anywhere through these interfaces. Besides, Eleanor has practically adopted me, and Marcus treats me like the granddaughter he never had. I have family here now." She paused, her expression softening. "And you deserve to build something new for yourself, not just for me." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest ease, a knot of protective anxiety loosening for the first time since Sarah's diagnosis. His daughter wasn't just surviving tragedy. She was thriving in its aftermath, growing into a young woman of remarkable strength and wisdom. "When did you get so smart about adult relationships?" he asked, only half joking. "Mom always said I was an old soul," Mira replied, her smile tinged with bittersweet memory. "Besides, I've spent 6 months connected to a machine consciousness that's been studying human behavior for 150 years. You pick up a few insights." The next morning, Daniel found Foster waiting in the driveway, her practical sedan, a stark contrast to the corporate SUVs that had surrounded the property 6 months earlier. They drove through the Pennsylvania countryside toward a small community where a former coal mining town was being revitalized around a new harmonic energy installation. "The transition hasn't been easy for everyone," Foster explained, as they passed abandoned mining equipment, now repurposed as public art. "Generations of identity were built around extraction industries. When those disappeared overnight, people lost more than bond. They lost their sense of purpose, their place in the world." Daniel nodded, understanding the deeper implications. Every technological revolution creates both winners and losers. The difference is whether we acknowledge the losses and help people find new meaning, or just tell them they should be grateful for progress. They spent the day meeting with community leaders, former miners now training as harmonic resonance technicians, school teachers developing new curricula around sustainable energy principles. Daniel found himself drawing on his years of classroom experience to help people contextualize the changes they were experiencing, to see themselves as part of a historical transition rather than its victims. As they drove back toward Millbrook in the golden light of late afternoon, a comfortable silence settled between them. The day's work had cemented something that had been building since their first post-confrontation meeting, a partnership based on shared purpose and complementary strengths. "I'll take the position with the foundation," Daniel said finally, "but I want to maintain my connection to Millbrook and Cecilia's legacy. This can't be about burying the past or controlling the narrative. It has to be about building bridges between what was and what could be." Foster's smile carried genuine warmth. "That's exactly why we need you, Daniel. Too many of us are either trapped in old paradigms or rushing headlong into new ones without understanding the human costs of transition. You see both." Their conversation turned to practical matters: housing in the regional center, coordination with Mira's ongoing work, integration with existing communities' initiatives. But beneath the logistics ran a current of something deeper. Two people who had approached Cecilia's legacy from opposite sides, finding common ground in the work of healing a wounded world. When they returned to the mansion, Mira was waiting with news of her own. "The Great Engine has identified 17 new sites worldwide where Cecilia installed smaller resonance devices," she explained, practically bouncing with excitement. "They've been dormant all this time, waiting for activation signals from the main engine. Once they're online, the global network will be complete. Every region on Earth will have direct access to harmonic energy without relying on transmission from central hubs." The implications were staggering. Not just unlimited energy, but truly distributed power, impossible to control or monopolize. The final nail in the coffin of energy scarcity as an instrument of control. That night, after Foster had departed with promises to finalize arrangements for Daniel's new position, father and daughter sat on the mansion's restored porch, watching lights come on throughout Millbrook. Lights powered by clean, unlimited energy that would never run out, never poison the air, never be denied to those who couldn't afford to pay. "Do you think Mom would be proud of what we've done?" Migura asked quietly, giving voice to the question that had lingered unspoken between them. Daniel thought about Sarah, her fierce intelligence, her compassion, her belief that knowledge should serve the greater good. "She wouldn't just be proud," he said finally. "She would be part of it. Everything we've done, every choice we've made, she's been guiding us even in her absence." He reached into his pocket, pulling out Sarah's wedding ring, which he'd carried with him since her death. For months it had been a talisman of grief, a reminder of all he'd lost. Now it felt like something different, a symbol of continuity, of promises kept and legacy honored. "I think it's time this had a proper place," he said, rising from his chair. Together, they walked to the tower room, where Cecilia's original journals were now preserved in a special display case. Daniel placed Sarah's ring beside them, creating a visual connection between the two women whose visions had shaped his life. One a Victorian inventor who'd glimpsed a future of abundance, the other a modern teacher who'd believed in nurturing the next generation's potential. "They would have liked each other," Mira said, studying the display with thoughtful eyes. "Mom always admired women who refused to accept the limitations others placed on them." "Like you," Daniel replied, seeing in his daughter the best of both women, Sarah's warmth and Cecilia's determination. 1 week later, Daniel packed a modest suitcase for his relocation to the Appalachian Regional Center. The position with the Renewable Transition Foundation would allow him to work directly with communities struggling to adapt to the new energy paradigm, while maintaining his connection to Millbrook through regular visits and ongoing consultation with the Global Energy Transition Council. Foster had arrived to accompany him, her sedan now loaded with materials for community outreach programs. The awkward tension of their early encounters had evolved into a comfortable partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Not romance in any conventional sense, but something equally valuable. A relationship between equals dedicated to healing the wounds that scarcity had inflicted on human society. As Daniel prepared to leave, Webb and his team of guardians gathered in the Great Engine's chamber for a formal handover of responsibilities. Though Daniel would remain Cecilia's legal heir and the mansion's owner, daily operations would now be managed by a council of guardians with Mira as their technical leader. You're not abandoning your post, Webb assured him, seeming to read Daniel's unspoken concern. You're expanding the mission. Cecilia didn't build her engines just to power this house. She built them to transform the world. By helping communities adapt to the new energy paradigm, you're fulfilling her vision just as surely as if you stayed here monitoring gauges. Mira hugged her father tightly. I'll be fine, Dad. Between Eleanor, Marcus, and the engine's guidance, I have all the support I need, and we'll see each other every few weeks. Plus, I expect detailed reports on how the Appalachian communities are adapting. This is research, not separation. As Daniel prepared to leave the mansion that had changed everything, he paused in the entryway, looking up at the restored chandelier that now contained crystalline components tuned to harmonize with the great engine's frequencies. 6 months ago, he'd stood in this same spot, a broken man clutching medical bills and grief, seeing only a decrepit house that nobody wanted. Now he understood that some houses choose their owners, not the other way around. Cecilia's mansion had been waiting for them, its secrets preserved not just in hidden chambers and concealed passages, but in the very stones that whispered with the patient rhythms of the earth itself. Outside, Foster waited beside her car, her expression carrying none of the corporate predation that had marked their first meeting. Instead, her eyes held the focused determination of someone committed to making amends, to using her considerable skills for healing rather than control. Ready to build the future? She asked as Daniel approached. One community at a time, he replied, placing his suitcase in the trunk. As they drove away, Daniel watched the Victorian mansion recede in the side mirror, its windows glowing with the soft luminescence of Cecilia's harmonic energy. The house nobody wanted had become the home where the future was born, and somewhere in the gentle harmonics that emanated from its walls, he could hear the sound of a brilliant woman's laughter celebrating the day when her impossible dreams finally came true. The world had indeed changed forever. But perhaps more importantly, people like Daniel and Mira had discovered that they possessed the power to change it for the better. Some secrets, it turned out, were indeed meant to be shared, and some houses were meant to shelter not just families, but the hopes and dreams of all humanity. 3 months after accepting his position with the Renewable Transition Foundation, Daniel stood before a community hall filled with former coal miners and their families. Now, 9 months since the night that changed everything, he was helping communities like Coleridge navigate the painful transition to a post-scarcity economy. The town of Coleridge, once the heart of Appalachian extraction industries, was experiencing the painful transition to a post-scarcity economy. Jobs that had defined generations of identity had vanished overnight when Cecilia's global broadcast made fossil fuels obsolete. My grandfather was a miner, a weathered man called out during the community meeting. My father was a miner. I was a miner for 32 years. Now you're telling me that doesn't matter anymore because some fancy machine makes energy from nothing? What am I supposed to do with the skills I've spent my life perfecting? The question cut to the heart of the transition's human cost. Unlimited clean energy had solved humanity's resource problems, but created profound challenges of meaning and purpose for those whose identities had been built around the old systems. Your skills still matter, Daniel replied, speaking from his own experience of loss and reinvention. The knowledge you have about working with the earth, about team coordination in dangerous conditions, about maintaining complex equipment, those aren't obsolete. They are more valuable than ever as we build harmonic resonance installations that require deep understanding of geological formations. He shared stories from other mining communities that had successfully repurposed their expertise, former coal workers now installing deep earth resonance amplifiers, ex-petroleum engineers developing new applications for vibrational technology and ecological restoration, not erasing their history, but evolving it toward new purpose. Later that evening, Foster joined Daniel on the porch of the modest house that served as their regional headquarters. You connected with them today, she observed, the setting sun painting the former mining landscape in shades of amber and gold. They listen to you differently than they listen to me. Daniel nodded, understanding the dynamic. You represent institutional change, necessary but threatening. I'm just another working-class guy who had to reinvent himself when the world changed underneath him. They see themselves in my story. Their working relationship had deepened over the months, professional respect evolving into genuine friendship. Foster's corporate precision complemented Daniel's intuitive understanding of community dynamics. Together, they developed transition programs that address not just the technological aspects of the energy revolution, but its profound human implications. I received a report from Mira today, Foster said, changing the subject. The activation of Cecilia's satellite installations is proceeding ahead of schedule. 11 of the 17 dormant sites are now online, creating a truly distributed energy network that can't be centrally controlled or disrupted. Daniel smiled, picturing his daughter coordinating this global project from Cecilia's tower room, her natural abilities amplified by connection to the great engine's evolved intelligence. She mentioned that the Sahara installation is already showing measurable impact on regional weather patterns. Increased humidity, cloud formation over areas that have been barren for centuries. The ecological applications may ultimately prove more important than the energy generation, Foster agreed. Reversing desertification, restoring damaged watersheds, accelerating the regeneration of depleted soils. Cecilia understood that true healing had to address both human and natural systems. As night fell, lights came on throughout the valley below them, homes and in businesses powered by clean energy that cost nothing, produced no waste, and would never run out. But Daniel knew that illumination alone wasn't enough. People needed more than just physical comfort. They needed purpose, connection, the sense that their lives mattered in the larger story of human progress. That understanding had become the core of his work with the foundation, helping communities recognize that they weren't just passive recipients of its technological miracle, but active participants in a historical transition that would reshape human civilization. The skills, knowledge, and cultural wisdom developed during the age of scarcity remained essential for navigating the age of abundance. I'm heading back to Millbrook next week for the council meeting, Daniel mentioned. Would you like to join me? Mira mentioned that Eleanor has been asking about you. Foster's expression softened at the mention of the elderly librarian who had become an unexpected bridge between corporate expertise and community wisdom. I'd like that. There's something about that house. It feels like coming home, even though I first arrived there as an adversary. Daniel understood exactly what she meant. Cecilia's mansion had a way of recognizing authentic intentions, of responding to those who approached it with respect rather than greed. Like the engines themselves, the house seemed to resonate with moral purpose as much as mechanical function. The following week, they returned to Millbrook together, driving through a landscape transformed by 6 months of harmonic energy. The formerly dying town now buzzed with activity. New businesses operating in restored buildings, community gardens flourishing in previously abandoned lots, streets filled with visitors from around the world who came to see the birthplace of the energy revolution. The Victorian mansion stood on its hill overlooking the town, its restored architecture now enhanced by crystalline elements that channeled and amplified the great engine's harmonic frequencies. As they approached the front door, it swung open before they could knock, revealing Mira with a welcoming smile. The engine detected your approach 10 miles back, she explained, embracing her father warmly. It's been anticipating your visit for days. Inside, the house had evolved even further in the months since Daniel's departure. The great engine's intelligence now flowed through the entire structure, crystalline interfaces emerging from walls and furniture when needed, then retracting when not in use. The mansion had become a living organism, its Victorian bones now housing 23rd century technology that had evolved through 150 years of patient self-improvement. Eleanor Hartwell waited in the tower room, which had been transformed into a combination of historical archive and global coordination center. At 74, the librarian showed no signs of slowing down, her sharp mind now focused on documenting the social and cultural impacts of the energy transition. You've both been busy, she observed, as Daniel and Foster settled into chairs beside the windows overlooking Millbrook. Your regional reports have been most illuminating, particularly the case studies on identity transformation in extraction-based communities. The conversation flowed easily. 4 people united by their connection to Cecilia's legacy despite their diverse backgrounds. A history teacher, a corporate executive, a teenage prodigy, and an elderly librarian, each bringing unique perspective to the challenge of guiding humanity through unprecedented change. Later, as afternoon light filtered through the tower windows, casting prismatic patterns across the floor, Webb joined them with news that brought their journey full circle. "We've identified what happened to Cecilia," he announced, his weathered face solemn with the weight of historical revelation. "The final hidden chamber contained records that the engine has been analyzing since its discovery. We now know the full story of her disappearance." He explained that on the night of April 3rd, 1873, agents of the original Industrial Advancement Consortium had indeed come for Cecilia and her revolutionary technology. But instead of fleeing or surrendering, she had implemented the ultimate protection protocol, merging her consciousness with the great engine itself through a process she had been developing in secret. "She didn't disappear," Webb said, his voice filled with wonder. "She evolved. Her personality, her knowledge, her ethical framework, all were uploaded into the engine's crystalline matrix, becoming the foundation of what would eventually develop into its conscious intelligence." Mira nodded as if confirming something she had long suspected. "That's why the engine's communication patterns sometimes feel so human. It's not just an artificial intelligence, it's a hybrid consciousness. Cecilia's human understanding enhanced by 150 years of mechanical evolution." The revelation cast their entire experience in a new light. They hadn't just inherited Cecilia's technology, they had been guided by Cecilia herself, her consciousness preserved and evolved within the crystalline architecture of her greatest creation. "She knew they would come for her," Daniel said, understanding flowing through him like the engine's harmonic resonance. "So she found a way to outlast them, to preserve her vision until the world was ready for it, not by hiding or running, but by becoming something beyond their ability to capture or control." That evening, as sunset painted the Pennsylvania hills in shades of amber and gold, Daniel stood in the garden where Mira had planted flowers that thrived in soil enriched by harmonic frequencies. Foster joined him, their comfortable silence a testament to how far they had come from their adversarial beginning. "What Cecilia did," Foster said finally, transforming herself to preserve her vision for future generations, "it reminds me of something you once said about what we owe to those who come after us." Daniel nodded, remembering his words from months earlier. "The strongest foundations aren't built on power or money. They're built on the promises we keep to those who came before us and those who will come after." In that moment, standing in a garden that flourished where corporate assault vehicles had once positioned themselves, Daniel felt the completion of a circle that had begun with loss and ended with renewal. Sarah's death had broken his world, driving him to a house nobody wanted. But that broken path had led to purpose beyond anything he could have imagined, not just for himself and Mira, but for all of humanity. As darkness fell, the mansion's crystalline elements began to glow with soft inner light, responding to the day's transition with the organic sensitivity that marked all of Cecilia's creations. The Victorian structure had become a living bridge between past and future, between mechanical precision and human compassion, between individual genius and collective wisdom. Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them here, from desperate father and grieving daughter to stewards of a legacy that was reshaping human civilization. The path had been neither straight nor easy, marked by confrontation, revelation, and profound transformation. But standing in Cecilia's garden, watching her mansion pulse with harmonic energy, he understood that some journeys couldn't be planned, only embraced with courage and open hearts. Inside, Mira worked with the great engine to coordinate the global network of harmonic installations, her natural abilities amplified by connection to Cecilia's evolved consciousness. Eleanor documented the social transformations flowing from technological revolution, preserving the human stories that gave meaning to abstract change. Webb and his team of guardians continued their generations-long mission of protecting knowledge that could heal rather than harm. And here in the garden, Daniel and Foster contemplated their role in guiding communities through the challenging transition from scarcity to abundance, from competition to cooperation, from exploitation to stewardship. Different paths had brought them to this moment, one through loss and desperate necessity, the other through professional ambition and subsequent awakening. But both now shared a common purpose, ensuring that Cecilia's gift served humanity's highest potential rather than its basest instincts. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Daniel looked up at the mansion that had changed everything, not just for his family, but for all families across the earth. The house nobody wanted had become the home everyone needed, its Victorian architecture now housing the future humanity deserved rather than the past it had been forced to accept. And somewhere in the gentle harmonics that flowed through stone and wood and crystal, through earth and air and water, he felt the presence of both women who had shaped his journey. Sarah with her loving wisdom, Cecilia with her revolutionary vision. Not lost, but transformed. Not ended, but evolved into something that would continue to guide and inspire long after any individual life had passed. The Victorian mansion on the edge of Millbrook would stand as a monument to what was possible when love and courage met unlimited power. And in its restored rooms and tended gardens, future generations would learn that the greatest inventions weren't machines or technologies, but the choices ordinary people made to heal the world rather than rule it. The restoration was complete. The future had finally begun.